What's the number one high value response if a guy is being distant? Hey, my name's Jack, and if you are stuck on a guy who is not available to you, click the first link beneath this video. I've got a resource that can help you, and I'm also available to support you individually or in our group program if that is of interest to you. All right, so let's get into this. If a guy is being distant, what is your best and most self-valuing course of action? So right off the bat, I want to make a distinction here. It depends whether you are in a relationship with the guy, right? Now, sometimes you might say, well, that's not even clear. And so I like to make things simple. If it's not clear to you that you're in a relationship, let's imagine that you're not in a relationship, right? We call this the 0-1 principle. One is you're in a relationship and it's progressing and it's mutually agreed upon, right? Doesn't mean it's necessarily going to work out, but that you're both on the pitch, as we like to say. Everything else we call a 0, just to keep it simple. 0 is anything that's not mutually clear that we are in a relationship. So if you're in a relationship and the guy is acting distant, what can you do? So the nuance in this, it may depend, is there any context within which he's acting distant, right? Did you guys have a rupture or an argument? Is something kind of going on with him? Is he super stressed at work? What I want to suggest to you is that nearly always in a relationship, there's going to be cycles of more connection and less connection, right? Whether that's a more gross effect or it's a more subtle effect. So your job might be to notice where in that cycle are you guys, and what is an acceptable amount of time for you for him to be distant. Or another way of saying that is that he might be being in his autonomy, right? He might be off kind of doing his thing. Hopefully you guys align around that, right? But probably if you're watching this video, you maybe aren't aligned around that. So one thing is just to suggest is, have you ever had a conversation about that? Have you ever talked about the polarity of relationship as between connection and autonomy, and what really works for both of you, right? If he wants to go off and have a day on his own, and by the way, maybe you do the same, right? So none of this is to imply that this is only a man's need, but this video is orienting as to you as a woman who dates or relates with men, right? So you can apply this if the circumstances are different for you. What are both of your needs for autonomy? What are your authentic needs for autonomy, right? For some people to feel really in their autonomy, they actually need to have a period of time where they're kind of in airplane mode, right? And they're fully available only to themselves. Maybe that works for you, maybe that doesn't work for you, but that's why this kind of conversation can help bottom that out. There's another kind of autonomy, which is, yeah, you're off doing your own thing, but I need to know that if there's a real issue, I can get hold of you, right? So this is kind of like airplane mode, but you've still got me and your favorites, and I can get through to you. And then your job is to really discern, is this something that warrants his attention, or is this something that actually we can talk about when he's back? So notice in all of these things, what we're actually talking about is you responding from your empowered self, right? Being clear what it is that you want and being available for an ahead of time discussion about it, right? So what I'm actually saying is the best time for this discussion is not when he's acting distant. The best time for this discussion, if you're in a relationship, is actually when you guys are connected and there's space for you to have this conversation. Now, if in that movement between connection and autonomy, like he stays in his autonomy for an amount of time that doesn't work for you, then you guys need to talk about that. Maybe that's a deal breaker. Maybe there's not a way forward, or maybe there's some way that he can experience autonomy without having to spend so much time on his own, right? So maybe he can experience more autonomy being in the garage, let's say, than being, off across the other side of the country. Maybe there's a way that you can experience more autonomy together by being in the same room, but by actually being more engaged in your own activities, right? So that there might be some ways that you can experience more of this dimension, but that actually allows more kind of connectedness to sit around it. That's something that you guys can explore together. Now, the other situation is that you guys aren't actually in a relationship, right? And he's acting distant. In some ways, the notion here might be the same, right? Ideally, what you want to do is notice, when does he want to come back, right? And then notice if that is aligned with you, right? So if you respond by doing nothing and just tracking, just noticing, let's see when he wants to come back into connection. Because ideally, what you want is a guy that wants to come back into connection with a frequency that works for you, right? And so bear in mind, this is different for different people. I talk to people who say, look, if a guy wants to have, 1 or 2 quality times that he hangs out with me a week, that's fine for me. I've got my own life. I like my own company. I've got my own friends. I've got my career. I've got my animals. I've got lots of things that are set up. I don't actually need him to be part of, right? Some of you want the kind of relationship where you spend most every night of the week together. Right? So you notice you're going to have different needs. This is part of your authenticity, is what is your need for connection? What is your need for autonomy? And what is the authentic bandwidth of cadence between those two things, right? Meaning you probably have some kind of range which still feels authentic to you. And then if we go beyond that range, it starts to feel like this is not working for you. Now, obviously, there are other dynamics that might come up here, right? There might be some mutual obligations that you have, chores or things that you need to work on together and you're not really sure where he is because he's being slow to communicate, right? Or it might be that your anxious attachment is getting activated and you actually want some reassurance from him, right? So again, these are all things that are, if you're in a relationship, best talked about ahead of time. If you're not in a relationship, I would encourage you to see what happens, even if that can be a difficult and excruciating process, because it's going to give you the best read on his natural kind of authentic desire to be back into connection with you, right? If he drops off for a month, he's probably not wanting to be in connection with you that often, right? So he's probably not going to want a relationship with you, right? If he drops off for an evening and then the next day or the next 48 hours, he's back in the connection. That's, still you get to decide ultimately, is that going to work for you? But that's kind of a different experience. If you want to do something and you can't just sit back and observe, right? Notice that, because this could be a kind of practice for you to lean into, right? It could be that you're missing him and wanting connection with him, but you actually practice, are there other buckets of connection that I can fill? Are there other people that I can reach out to? But if you do want to make some kind of connection with him, ideally what you'd make is an authentic connection about your authentic experience, which could be something like, I'm really looking forward to seeing you next, right? So it's not saying, hey, when are we next getting together? It's not making him wrong. It's actually just, naming your desire, right? Like, you could even say, I miss you, or I'm looking forward to connecting, or, can't wait for us to be together again. And then, so in a way, you're greenlighting him. And then again, you got to see what happens from that, right? If you're greenlighting him or kind of reinforcing your desire for connection and you're still not getting a lot back, that's really valuable information, right? That's the point where you need to notice, hey, is there something that I'm wanting that actually isn't available here? And this is a sobriety practice. This is for me to notice the thing that I want, I'm not actually going to get with him. And I'm going to set up an ongoing pattern of frustration and disappointment if I try to get it here. Now, you may not decide that after just kind of one round of this, right? You may take a longer view, but if it's the early stages of a connection, often it's going to be revealing of what he's actually available for, right? There's an old Yiddish proverb, as it begins, so it ends. That's a partial truth. I don't think it's the whole truth. Sometimes things, start incredibly intensely and then they sort of fizzle out over time. But it's just sometimes your best read for noticing, how up for connection is this person, right? Ideally, we want to be out of the blame business, right? Ideally, you have a right to your desires and he has a right to his, and we're trying to find some kind of alignment there. If it's too hard work to get that alignment, especially initially, I would probably notice and trust that, right? Now, if there's some big structural piece in the way, right, that you happen to have met him just as he's gotten his biggest promotion and suddenly he's working 7 days a week, 12 hours a day, right? Yes, that's probably going to have an impact on his availability for connection. You might say, well, okay, why don't we kick it down the road, right? Sort of meaning, rather than trying to make something happen now, I can let him know, hey, I like you and I'd like to get to know you more. So if you're on the other side of settling into this role and you still have an interest in connecting more and getting to know me, reach out to me. So then we're not trying to do this thing. You're still going to go and live your life, right? You're going to still be out in the dating marketplace. You're not, if you were a home for sale, you wouldn't be taking your sign in, right? You would still be available. But you're kind of saying, look, I get it. There's some unique circumstances, right? Be mindful of that, because circumstances and season, I think, is all part of the fabric and texture that we relate within. So Sometimes things come back better in a different season, and quite often they don't, right? Meaning if there was enough of an initial connection, sometimes it's going to be explored, even if it's difficult from the beginning. But definitely in my own life and other people's lives, I've seen it where actually, there's just a different season. Something else is possible because there's a big structural constraint. But I would leave that kind of to him and to life, right? Meaning you're not going to sort of sit there strategizing, figuring out how can you kind of make this thing work. I would advise you to just sit back a little bit, let it come to you, and notice if there's a different season of availability. You'll notice. Now you may be no longer in the dating marketplace because you've actually met someone, and there's another connection that you want to pursue. If you acknowledge that most men at times are going to be distant, even if that's momentarily, right? Even if that's because he's put his attention on something else and you're still attending to the we space, to the relational space between you. Even if you acknowledge that for many guys, there's going to be this desire to empty out and have some of their own space at times. The question then just becomes, does this authentically align with you, right? So what I'm saying is you're going to have an easier time with his distance if you don't make him wrong for it, but you do stay connected to yourself. We're not looking to subjectify him and say, well, I wouldn't take that kind of distance, or, if I hadn't responded for half a day, this would mean this. Let's find out what it means, right? Maybe he's a slow texter. Maybe that doesn't work for you, but maybe he's a slow texter and it can work for you. Maybe he's a slow texter because he's not into it. Maybe he's a slow texter because he's a slow texter. We want to try to get close to what's actually true, rather than imagining what could be true or superimposing our own ideas on him. For many of you, what you really want is the guy that can go into a little bit of his own distance and autonomy and fairly quickly move back into connection with you, right? So he has his own autonomy and space, but once he's taken space, what does he want? He wants to come and connect with you. That's the ideal that most of you are looking for. That's why if you can sit on your hands for a little bit and just notice what happens, it can be the best information available to you. If you're with a guy that wants to take space and then wants to come back into connection with you within an interval of time that feels acceptable to your range of authentic bandwidth, as I was calling it, that's probably what you're looking for. So if you're in a situation, again, where you are dating a married guy or in love with someone who's in a relationship that's not with you, if you're a third wheel in some way, or if you're stuck on a guy that in your heart of hearts is not emotionally available to you or not available for a relationship, click the first link beneath this video and let me help. As always, I'm Jack. Thanks for being here.